Big move. Big win. The moose is loose. Big moves. Big win. The moose is loose. Big moves. Big win. The moose is loose. Big. 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 Big.
There he is. Welcome, everybody, to the show. Joining us is our usual co-conspirator, Dan the Dancing Man, and also as our special guest conspirator this evening, Carl Crater from the Wargame Bootcamp. Welcome, Carl, and thanks for coming. And we're sorry in advance for subjecting you to the abuse which you will endure this evening.
I'm still trying to recover from the moose montage.
Hey, come on, man.
Dan is a creative powerhouse. Do not question the creative powerhouse.
Come on. Hey, William, how are you? Hello from Ontario. We got Meandering Mike here.
Yeah, we did need the picture of Genghis Khan worked in there somehow, though, Dan. You got to work on that yet. I don't know what that noise was. It didn't sound.
Sorry, that
like
was my phone. I need to silence it.
Yeah, the only thing you're going to hear
definitely
here is
already
this.
not. So after like several weeks of sticking to the topic, we're not doing that tonight. Although our topic is easy war games.
Yeah,
we'll probably drift a little because we've got no basic structure to operate this rickety ass machine this evening. So I'd like to welcome everybody to the show. Thanks for coming by. So easy games. We talked about what is Meandering Mike. Watch last week's show. You'll be completely illuminated after you watch last week's show. So we're not going to talk about that. Now we're just going to talk about the easy ones. So Dan, what is an easy war game? An example.
Look at that. Huh? Go
by Dan's standard.
What's an easy war game? You know what? I don't know if I'm going to get flack for this, but I would say Combat Commander.
Okay, I mean, I think that sounds a little heavy, and so some people would consider that a medium weight game. I don't think it's
really
all that light, but I don't think it's particularly complicated either. Now, I have this this plan to get lure Dan to WBC, and we'll duct tape him to a chair, give him a pair of tweezers, and force him to play OCS for a week. And then we'll see what he thinks is an easy war game.
Well, look, I mean,
I'll bring the duct tape and the
Ogre's easy.
Ogre's pretty easy. I haven't played Ogre since the little box Ogre, so I have no knowledge of where that game currently is. But I mean, certainly it was not complicated. It did fit in a index card size box back in the day. After all, this is easy. D-Day Dice.
Every Day makes a good suggestion. Maneuver from GMT.
Yep. It's kind of a chess-like game, I would say, with a sort of thin veneer of vaguely Napoleonic topic, but it is more of an abstract strategy game. I mean, it's about as Napoleonic as Risk is, really. But it's a good game, and if you are into chess, it's kind of neat. But it's a lot more like wargaming than chess is, because it's got like these geomorphic boards that you put 4 boards together to make like your map. And then you have a deck of cards that allows you to like activate the pieces, and it's actually kind of neat. And there's an expansion too that like adds more cards, and they're tiny, adorable little cards too. So
the cool thing about it, we like that the war.
They won't after I call immigration in advance of his arrival.
Yeah, Flying Pig games. They're old school tactical. That can't be too hard, man.
Oh, I don't think it is. No, it's Certainly, it's less complicated. I'm not even going to try to compare it to ASL. I think that would be absurd. But
I know,
even
it's crazy.
it's considerably simpler. Right? That's a new thing that I just invented.
I just got that game, so I have no idea. I haven't looked.
Yeah,
at it.
the sit down and play, or shut up and play, or whoever those guys are, just reviewed
Best
Undaunted
war
Stalin.
game.
They said it's literally the best game ever on any topic. So I haven't actually watched the video yet, but I would imagine David is being totally insufferable now. That's probably actually not true because David is never insufferable, but you know what I'm saying. I would be an insufferable fucking prick if that was me.
You would?
I totally would. Look at this. He's got to say the greatest game ever.
The best game ever.
So
look, Table Battles by HOLLANDSPIELE.
Table Battles, very easy to play.
One of the
Brave Little Belgium.
Yeah.
Sure. Ryan Heilman's game, Brave Little Belgium. His Lucky Little Luxembourg is even easier to play.
It is. I would argue that anything you have a vested interest in that you think you really enjoy, it's going to be an easier game.
I guess.
Regardless of the rules.
I agree with that, actually. If you've already decided you're doing this game, and you're invested in that game, not just financially, but you have made the mental decision to say, I'm going to get into this game. That right there is one of the most powerful tools for learning the game, right? You're just gonna try and learn it. You're gonna probably get some stuff wrong. You're probably gonna make mistakes, and you're probably gonna have to restart at some point, but you'll figure it out.
Yeah.
A Great Day says, no retreat. No retreat's easy.
So I haven't played a Hold Fast, but I have had a couple of cracks at 2 different no retreat games now. And these are Carl parody designs from originally from Victory Point Games, I thought, but then GMT picked them up and it's done a couple of new ones, and there's some more in the pipeline, and it's a very successful series. There's some excellent playthrough video on No Retreat Russian Front, which is the only reason I had any desire to play it at all. And go watch those videos if you, like me, bounced pretty hard off those rules. I don't think it's complicated as such, but I had a hard time grokking those rules in No Retreat personally. And part of that's just go ahead.
Does Carl make it easy for you to learn rules?
I don't know if it's Carl or if it's your level of interest or if it's just the way, I'm
going to go grab one of my easier topic titles here.
I don't know. No Retreat is, I always kind of enjoyed, but it wasn't one of my go-tos. There you go. That's a good learning game.
Yeah. This starter game.
Yeah.
Did he just pull up Case Blue?
I'm all about the easy introductory stuff.
Right. Hold Fast is a good introductory series. It's simple.
I've heard that. All I know about Hold Fast is I watched a review that Marco Arnaudo did several years ago at this point, and he liked it, but that doesn't mean I would like it. But that doesn't, I don't get paid to agree with everything Marco says. That's not the point of reviewers. War Chest.
I don't.
I think
that's another David Thompson.
I think when I am hearing that name, I'm thinking of War Room, which doesn't look particularly simple. I mean, that's basically Axis and Allies on steroids, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I just got that one too.
Yeah, I think this is generally true. I don't think one necessarily infers the other, but one typically. I mean, what are you going to, even if Case Blue was an SCS game and had 8 pages of rules, what are you going to do? Tell people, I think you should really start with this game with 10 maps and 16 counter sheets. No. That's a little bit of an overbearing ask, right?
If there's 8 players, then yeah, sure, because they're going to show you how to play.
Everybody gets 2 counter sheets. Yeah.
Yeah, that. Angry Day also mentions House Divided.
Yeah.
Which is interesting because it starts easy, but if you keep adding the rules that suddenly forgot his name.
Mark
Herman.
No, the guy Alan Emmerich has a website where he kept adding rules to it.
Oh.
So there's
okay.
Is it a Mark Herman game?
No, it's a Frank Chadwick game.
Oh, that okay. What about
you're thinking of For the People?
Yeah.
which is a great game.
What about Down in Flames?
I've never played Down in Flames. It's supposed to be easy. It's the kind of thing that they play at like WBC and or Consim World Expo, like at 9 p.m. when everybody's either exhausted or drunk. So I figure it probably is relatively easy to play. And I think isn't GMT bringing out a new Down in Flames product? Didn't I hear something about that?
Well, they've got Wild Blue Yonder. And
okay, that's in print, I believe.
And then they're doing another one. And if you go to the GMT weekends, also the Pacificon weekends in California, they do a weekend-long tournament where you just sit down and start playing, and they have records of all your pilots and all your stuff from when you started playing. So,
Tank Duel is another one of those perennial convention favorites, I think. I have seen it played kind of a lot at conventions. And again, it's, you know, the kind of thing where people have been involved in a bunch of pretty crusty stuff all week. And they're going to play it at night when they're mentally exhausted. On the other hand, I tried to do Red Flag Over Paris like that, which is not a complicated game. After we had gone out and eaten like 2 pounds each of prime rib, yeah, that just wasn't happening. I was in like an actual beef haze, and I literally could not even read the rules. It was comical.
Sounds like me after we go to Korean barbecue.
It's just there you go.
Hey, so Tank Duel, I'm sure that Down in Flames you can add a whole slew of people, right?
Yeah, it's as many as you want, really.
And what about Tank Duel? Can you do that with Tank Duel?
Yeah, pretty much.
Pretty much based on but you have to have a display. So if you only have 8 displays, then that's how many people you can hold.
Yeah, so you might need a couple sets of it or something like that, but
because you can have like the Battle of Kursk.
Wow, I don't know if we want to go that
using individual tanks. I believe that will be coming next year from Grognard Simulations.
Yes.
So,
and what? Okay, so what about
along with their squad-based Waterloo game?
What about 4X? There, Space Empires 4X. That's not difficult, man.
No, I thought that's pretty easy actually. It's not incredibly brief rule book, but there's a lot of small scenarios and I think it's very scalable. I mean, if you want to play it solitaire, you can. If you want to play it with 8 people, you can. There's ways to do that. If you want to play it with 6 different empires, you can. If you want to play it with teams, you can. So it's got a lot of flexibility kind of built into it. And I think Space Empires is pretty fantastic personally.
Hey, did you guys know this?
Nope. Didn't know. I know that he released a thing based on Lovecraftian lore in the vein of 4 Against Darkness, which is a like journaling dungeon crawling type game. Not really journaling game, but it's like a solitaire pen and paper. The book itself says, I'd love to find that. It's in the RPG stuff, which I still haven't unpacked for the most. It's like The Traveler. It's the only RPG stuff I've unpacked. They insist that it's not an RPG. I believe A Victory Lost is probably pretty simple.
Yeah, that whole series is...
Yeah, not crazy simple, but about SCS simple, or maybe just a little more.
Yeah,
and I think SCS is incredibly easy. Yeah, that's MMP.
Yeah, it's their international one because it's a Japanese designer, I want to say.
Yeah, I believe that's correct.
Yeah. The new one.
Yes, this is exactly correct, actually. All the old Avalon Hill games from the 60s, I don't know if they're all... The late 60s, they started to put out some more complicated stuff. But like the traditional, I don't even want to say Avalon Hill classics, but up to about 65, 66, everything they released was pretty easy. And even well into the 70s, everything was still being resolved with a 2-to-1 attack on an escarpment outside of Tobruk. That's supposed to be pretty easy. So that's this, I believe, the system that eventually was adapted into Lock and Load Tactical. But Lock and Load Tactical's gotten beefed up a lot. If you look at the latest rules, the big PDF compendium that you can get from Lock and Load, there's a lot to it. It's a pretty meaty game. But I think if you buy like just one of the boxes and use the rule book out of that, you're in for something a bit simpler.
Yeah, they're just When you say easy, you talking about the amount of detail? When you say hard, I mean,
Well, there's different types of detail, aren't there? Right. I mean,
yeah,
you could
because
have a
rock and
game
roll.
with extensive historical notes. That's detail, or a lot of like flavor in the game with historical unit designations and stuff like that. That's all detail, but not necessarily detail that impacts play at all. What I think you
Right.
mean is detailed rules, right? And we're just talking, casually about easy war games. What war games are easy? What maybe makes them easy, right? Is it good example here is Alexander Fontaine Rousseau asks or mentions Sekigahara, which a lot of people really love, and I think that's one of those entry ways into wargaming. And yet I'm reasonably sure, having looked at Granada, which is a similar system, it's pretty different from what I'm used to. So I would probably not regard, and same thing with No Retreat, right? It's just really different than the other stuff that I've played. So a lot of people do consider it relatively easy. I didn't. So
Yeah, there's
What
lots of stuff I've
what
bounced off.
about what about Bill Day's Panzer? That's not difficult. The intro is the intro scenarios are really easy, man. Then it's modular. Everything is modular, man.
Bill, I don't think it's Bill. It's
Bill Day.
yeah, Day. No, Day's the right
Jim
last
Day.
name.
Jim
James
Day.
Day.
James.
Yeah, something like that sounds right.
Yeah.
So I guess I really haven't looked at Panzer. Okay, I mean I'm familiar with the fact that it originally came out back in the day from, I believe, Yaquinto,
Quinto.
or was it Battle? I believe it was Yaquinto, and then it went for a while to 3W, which re-released it, and then now it's with GMT, and I don't know what the sort of chain of rules changes as involved in there. I don't know how similar the current game is to the old game or not, but it's a pretty detailed tactical tank simulator, right? That said, I believe there is a basic game which is supposed to be relatively easy, and then an advanced game which is supposed to be quite a lot more complicated.
And to be honest, to get the full out of that game, you're going to have to go to the advanced and the optional.
Absolutely, yeah.
They've been with something like the Next War series from GMT, where you could just play the basic game if you want, but I really think you're kind of missing out if you just stick to the basic game, because I think the real joy in that game is, frankly, those advanced rules, the naval rules and the air rules and all that stuff. John Stanley asked about the Gettysburg game from C3 This was designed by Mark. At least I recall Mark saying that this was designed as an introductory war game. Now, I have mixed feelings about that. I have a little bit of mixed feelings about that, because I don't think new wargamers are going to go buy copies of C3I. But that said, experienced wargamers can pick it up and then use it to teach new players. That's certainly completely valid. It is pretty simple. I found it pretty unsatisfying. I think I just bounced off it. Just the choice of scale there. I feel like there's not enough there for me. But on the other hand, Waterloo, I think, was the very next issue of C3I, which uses a very similar system. It's just rescaled, and I liked that a lot better. I think that's a pretty good system.
Yeah, I think the scale on Gettysburg was a little wonky, and I did not enjoy it that much. But, Jason W. mentioned something interesting. He said easy is having to not constantly reference player aids and rulebook for exceptions.
Well, the rule book I'll certainly agree with, but there's plenty of pretty easy games where you got to look at the player's aid for the CRT and whatnot. Yeah. There are examples abound, and also that raises the point of what about the old school SPI games that largely put that stuff on the map rather than having a player aid card. So, but certainly, somebody mentioned, Alistair mentions that rules with fewer exceptions are easier, and I think that's something nobody's really going to strenuously argue with.
I don't think they do exceptions like they used to. I mean, Paths of Glory was pretty bad as far as exceptions go. Yeah,
a lot of people say that. I don't really feel like that's the case. But I mean, I don't think it's. I'm not going to say there's not plenty of exceptions. Exceptions-based rules in there. There are. I just don't find Paths of Glory to be exceptional in that regard.
Well, that's the one I always use to compare, but I've noticed that games have kind of shied away from making large exceptions all the time and trying to make rule systems that kind of incorporate what they need to incorporate instead of making exceptions all the time.
I certainly think some designers are doing that. I certainly also think some designers are still not. The not school would be exemplified, of course, by the late great Richard Berg, I suspect. This is absolutely true. New players are probably going to bounce off $35 for a magazine, unless they are also Linux people, in which case they will say, oh, that's what a magazine costs. No problem. I think I must have missed that, actually. But
No, I
Harsh
saw
Rules has
that.
done a bunch of war game stuff, including stuff on Peasant Glory, actually, and has, always does a very good and very thorough job of explaining whatever game he is working on at this point. I think this is true too, and you could see this in Starter Kit, right? There's a lot. That's why some people just decide, I'm good with Starter Kit. I don't have to go to the advanced rules with the rules for caves and shit like that. We don't even have to worry about that. So I think this is absolutely true. I think it's clean. It is pretty clean. I don't know if it's simple as such. I mean, it was a pretty high-ranked complexity game, even back in the Avalon Hill days. But it's certainly not the sort of monolithic edifice of complexity that modern ASL is. That's for sure.
Stigler says something here, and he's just talking about squad leader. He's not talking ASL, I'm assuming, right?
I think Stigler's probably talking about the whole edifice, and there's actually a sense in which I agree that this is true, right? There's a lot of Chrome. Now, the thing with ASL, I'm going to talk about ASL right here in this context, because that's like the primary vehicle by which people do squad leader today, whether it's ASL or Starter Kit, same difference. There's like a specialized rule for absolutely everything, right? You want to fight at night, there's a rule for that. There's a fog, there's a rule for that. Is there a paradrops? There's a rule for that. Are the defenders in caves? There's a rule for that. Are the defenders in sewers? There's a different rule for that. So there is like a specialized rule for everything. And in some sense that can be considered Chrome, but in no scenario ever published are you going to use everything, right? You're just not. That has literally never occurred unless maybe Critical Hit did that. You're going to need one or two of those really specialized rules. Well, maybe more than that at any given time. If you have like a night fight with, say, Maragleese is a great example, actually. I don't think this is going to be in the upcoming kit, by the way, but it's a night drop. So you've got repair drops. It's at night. There's a bunch of special stuff going on. You're going to have concealment out the wazoo. You might even have some hidden units, which is a different thing than concealment. So yeah, I'll agree with that. But you can also find plenty of scenarios where you don't really have to deal with any of that stuff. So
that's kind of like why I like Combat Commander, because they'll take special situations but fit them into the rules that already exist. They had a scenario where they had like a blizzard you fought in Norway, and they just used the normal smoke rules, and you drew a smoke token every turn, and that's the coverage of the entire map.
Okay.
So I thought that was really clever how they never changed rules. They just bent them around to make them work for whatever situation they were trying to simulate.
Yeah, I will, of course, agree with Agray Day here. Worthington does almost everything that Worthington does is fairly simple, actually.
Yes.
Which is not to say that it's necessarily rudimentary or unrefined, right? They've got some pretty nice stuff. I suspect that Soviet Dawn actually might be one of their more complicated titles, to be completely honest. And I believe that's available again, by the way.
But Soviet Dawn, isn't that a State of Siege?
It is. Yep. I've done video on it, actually. It was a lot of fun.
You held up Band of Brothers earlier, and one of the nice things about that game.
Oh dear.
Sorry.
Another question here is, why isn't there a successful ASL PC game? If you could play ASL without the specialty rules overhead and have the PC handle those, it seems like a win. So I believe there have been attempts to do a squad leader computer adaptation in the past. However, the deal now is that I strongly suspect, so, somebody can correct me on this, but I strongly suspect that Multiman Publishing does not have the rights to license that to a computer game developer, and that those rights would need to come from Hasbro. And that's a big deal to get Hasbro interested enough to license you something, and then you're talking a substantial amount of money. So I think the real answer here is that's why. I think you need to get Hasbro in on that action, and that's why it's happening. Now, there have been some, as John Longshore mentioned, some very ASL-esque computer quote-unquote war games, and I think Tigers in the Snow is one of those things.
Have you ever played Tigers in the Snow?
Nope. There is a board war game called Tigers in the Mist, which is a game from GMT. It's about the Bulge, and I'm trying to remember who the designer was, and I don't remember who the designer was. Kenny Parker? Tigers in the Mist.
Manders mentions the Worthington ACW games.
Ray Freeman, Worthington's got a number of ACW games, not all of which are in the same series. Somewhat confusingly, their Chancellorsville game is not in the same series as their Antietam and Shiloh games. That series is called, the Antietam and Shiloh games are in a series called the Civil War Brigade Battle Series, I believe. And I did some video on that too. And we didn't like the Antietam game because of the way the victory conditions were structured. But we did like the Shiloh game, and unfortunately, the Vassal module broke on us. I think the next game in that series is going to be on the 7 days, the Lee and the Peninsula campaign. I don't know if that's out yet or not.
Yep, and then Alexandria mentions Hollandspiele. I have a lot of the John.
Oh yeah,
Civil War games, which are very good.
As does Tiny Battle Publishing. Actually has a lot of pretty simple war games. And I know Stigler is going to fly into a rage when I say this, but the Decision mini and folio games are all relatively simple as well, and also relatively inexpensive. And somebody mentioned the Napoleonic 20 series, which was a Victory Point Games thing. That they had a deal with GMT to redo the whole series apparently, and only one volume called, I think, Faded Glory or Fading Glory came out, which was a very nice presentation. And unfortunately, no other volumes came out. That Victory Games got bought by people who didn't care about war games. And I believe that series, Series 20, whatever, is going to come back from Decision. And I have heard nothing since then from the folks at Decision about that.
Interesting. I didn't know that. I was there when they did Fading Glory. And I know Alan Emmerich had something and kind of pulled back from GMT for something.
Yeah, I have no idea what the background is there.
Yeah.
I found this game easy.
Inferno. Is that a Vento Nuovo?
Yeah,
Yep.
I found it easy.
Okay.
That's a good series too. They even have a Napoleonic one.
Really?
I'm trying to remember. I think it's Borneo.
Really?
I want to say.
What? Borodino?
Borodino. Sorry.
There's a big difference between Borodino and Borneo. Just to clarify.
Sorry.
In case there was confusion. Carl's about to go full Dan.
Conflict of Heroes.
I'd say I think that's comparable to old school tactical.
Combat.
I'd rather, of the two, I would personally choose to play old school tactical. That's me. So,
and also
Jeffrey Edwards out with the news out of Worthington. Apparently, they got a whole bunch of stuff in the pipeline.
The third edition of Conflict of Heroes, they fixed some issues that I had with the game. So
it is the third edition. What games released with the third edition rules? Because I played Guadalcanal.
It was the first two, Awakening the Bear and Kursk. I don't know if they've updated the other ones. I just didn't. They changed the points so you wouldn't just sit there if you ran out of points and the guy, that's the other guy running around on the board.
Yeah, some of these old SPI quads are very simple, very easy, and some of them. I don't think they all hold up equally well, but I think 30 Years War Quad, Crimean War Quad, those hold up pretty well. Napoleon's Last Battles holds up pretty well. Frankly, Napoleon at War is fine too. Blue and Gray is fine, although I think there's better options at that complexity level nowadays than there was back in the 70s when those came out.
What about what about CNC there?
Command and
Commands and
Colors?
Colors?
Yeah. Well,
I think that's a
scale up, like other games do.
Yeah, I mean, I've used that as a intro to wargaming at conventions in the past. Commands and Colors Napoleonics, which is the most complicated one maybe, but it's not a big leap up in complexity over the easy ones, right? Ancients is probably the easiest one, but they're all pretty simple. Rollo Baker, first of all, welcome to the show. Asks if the chrome and complexity make the war game better. Certainly not necessarily. We're having focus issues now. Come on, there we go. Certainly, I don't think that you can say that's generally true, right? Generally speaking, if it's making the war game better, people aren't calling it chrome or complexity. They're calling it, meatiness or detail or verisimilitude or what have you. Chrome, I think, tends to be used in a lot of cases in a fairly disparaging way. I think the distinction here is it Chrome that adds to the game experience or Chrome that doesn't? And I'm sure we've all seen examples of both, right? Of Chrome that doesn't. One example of Chrome that does is the rule for squares in Commands and Colors Napoleonics. Infantry units can form a square. And if so, there's like a game cost to do that, where you have to put you have to tie up one of the cards in your hand for as long as that unit remains in square. And if you put a second unit in square, then you're tying up a second one. So there's like a cost to do it. And I'd consider that a chromey mechanic, but nevertheless, I think it's one that you really need for Napoleonics, even at the fairly abstract level that we have in something like Commands and Colors in general.
It's all with your interest. I just played Front Towards Enemy, and I just thought the coolest thing ever was you have to get your wounded out.
Okay.
Or you don't win the scenario. So the Americans have to, they have to get their wounded out on choppers or however they got in, and so it adds a whole new kind of dimension to the game, because you're not just, that guy's dead, just leave that counter or whatever.
Stigler says Blue and Gray sucked. Well, what set him off is me mentioning Decision, obviously. But I don't think people. I don't know that people thought Blue and Gray sucked back in the day. I don't think it's something. I think there's a lot of better alternatives now. Frankly, it's easy to play. You got to give it that. Doug says that the early Borg games are better introductions. Battle Cry is quite straightforward. I've never played Battle Cry. I think Commands and Colors Ancients is perfectly straightforward, personally. It helps that it's a clearly written rule book, right?
I think Battle Cry is slightly more complicated, actually.
What's that, Dan?
Yeah, because they have ranges. What?
You play Battle Cry?
Yeah, we run it all the time at the boot camp.
You've played Battle Cry like you're some kind of alien.
No.
I mean, it was a real popular game, and somebody mentioned
that Borg got his license back from Hasbro.
There you go, Jason W. Yeah, it says Borg got the rights back from Hasbro. Supposedly, that'd be great. I'd be happy to see that in print. I'd like to know if somebody's going to bring back a House Divided. Actually,
that's a good game too. I've used that a lot in the boot camp to introduce people to wargaming, especially like Euro gamers and stuff. No, the Phalanx version is very pretty and very.
Oh, it's definitely prettier than the Mayfair Games version, which I think is pretty ugly, actually.
Yeah, I didn't even bother with that.
Now, I not to invalidate Agri Day's suggestion of Across 5 Aprils here. I think that's a perfectly valid selection. However, in general, I have a pet peeve with this kind of thing, because every so often we'll see this on Facebook, we'll see this on BGG sometimes, not really so much on Consum World. You'll know why as soon as I say it. Where you'll come across somebody who says something to the effect of, "Hey, I just played Sekigahara and I've really loved it, and I want to get into more war games. And this Hex Encounter thing was pretty cool." what are some good, easy introductory war games for me to play? And somebody recommends this fucking thing that's been out of print for 30 years. That's a bit annoying. Now, again, that wasn't the premise that we set out with tonight, so I'm not ripping on it, you Ray Day. But that's a thing that happens all the time. It's like, here's this game that was released from Rand Games in 1975, and they printed 60 of them. You should definitely try that. Start with that. I mean, what fantasy Narnia-ass universe is this recommendation coming from?
That's like a person with an agenda for sure.
Well, that's fine. Maybe they love that game, and it could be great. But you got to be able to get. It's not a useful suggestion if you can't get it. These are actually really good introductory games. Just ask Brant. He runs these things at every single convention. Now, the other thing with Across 5 Aprils specifically is that it is pretty similar to the Battle Hymn. Is it Battle Hymn system from Compass?
Yeah, same.
The first game of which is Gettysburg and Pea Ridge, and then Volume 2 is coming at some point. And that's a pretty good system. I liked it as a computer game. I didn't like it as a board game, but that's more a Gary thing than it is an Eric Lou Smith thing. It's
similar to Across 5 Aprils. It's got a lot of the same stuff. In fact, people ask me about 5 Aprils, and I steer them towards that and say, well, you can still buy this one.
Well, Stigler, let me ask you this. Wouldn't James Longstreet have agreed with that premise? So I'm just saying. They all have ranged combat. I don't know. I've never played Battlecry. I can't speak to that. I can tell you that. So I've played Ancients, Napoleonics, Memoir 44, and Tricorn. And of those 4, Ancients is the easiest, I think. I think Napoleonics is the most complicated. I think Tricorn's pretty easy. I think Memoir is the pretty complicated. I mean, again, we're not talking like a 4 on the complexity scale for Ancients and 8 on it for Napoleonics, right? You're talking like 4.5, right? I think Memoirs, there's a lot to it. There's a lot going on with B. I mean, every time I've played Memoir, it's been a terrible experience, to be honest about it. But
I'm not a big fan of Memoir either. The scale for World War II, I know there's no real scale, but
yeah, exactly. It's the abstract scale.
And I think Battlecry is actually one of the more complicated ones because the rules diverge just slightly from what the more modern CNC games are, because it was the first one. And he's got like different ranges for different units and different route and braking rules that are they're not complex, but they're different than some of the other games.
Let's make stuff. There was a copy for, I want to say, $10 or $15 on the flea market table at Compass Expo. I hope Gregory Smith bought it, actually, because he was talking about it.
Of the
talking about Gregory Smith
of A House Divided. No, this was the Ugly Mayfair version.
Oh, okay.
Gregory Smith's games are quite easy.
For the most part,
no, I mean, I would agree with that statement, but I don't know that everybody necessarily would. If you look at something like The Hunters, which I think is pretty easy, I thought was pretty easy game. It's very procedural, right? You kind of, okay, you set it up. The book tells you how to set it up. The book tells you to do this, and this. You do that, and that, and off you go. And you just kind of follow along as you go.
Yeah,
some people well, yeah. I mean, some people don't take well to that style of design. But yeah, I thought everything I've seen from Greg has been pretty easy. I think a maybe better example is something like Pacific Tide, Imperial Tide, those kind of things, which are, damn it, do I have more water here? Which are 2-player games, and which are, I believe have solitaire mechanisms, but they're not procedural in the same way. And those are pretty light as well, and quite abstract.
Well, that's an interesting point, because I've been asked a lot at the boot camp. About solo games to start off with. And I said, if you can find another player, you're much better off. Simply because you'll bounce the rule questions off each other. You'll have someone else to help you figure things out, even if they're not experienced. You guys will have two brains instead of one trying to grok all this stuff.
Yes, I completely agree. Now, I've also said in the past that the best introductory war game is doesn't matter what it is, but it's the war game that your buddy knows how to play and is willing to teach you. That's Absolutely. The best introductory war game. It doesn't matter whether that's, Risk or ASL. Doesn't really matter. Unless your buddy's just a terrible teacher. That's possible. I mean, certainly we've seen those people. I wouldn't characterize the like say the solitaire sequence, like the Hunters, for example. I wouldn't characterize that as a beginner's war game particularly. But you're going to get some really funny ideas. I mean, if you start gore gaming with that, you're going to get some really funny ideas about what war games are like too. And I wouldn't necessarily want I wouldn't necessarily want that to be the takeaway. That there are all these sort of prescriptural, very organized things that you just follow the sequence and that's how it works. I did not in any sense have a problem with any of the Greg Smith rule books, I got to tell you.
Quartermaster General.
If you can get 6 or 8 players, sure.
6. I don't think it fits 8, does it?
I always forget.
I believe it accommodates 6.
If you play with 3 players, no?
You can, but it's kind of a pain in the ass because the only way it works, you've always got 6 factions in the game, regardless of the number of players, and you've really kind of got a lot to do with one faction. So my recommendation is I mean, you could certainly do it with 2 or 4 or whatever. It works better with 4 than it does with 3. But I think it's a much stronger game with 6 players than it is with 3 or 4.
Wow. Angry Day asks if Brazen Chariots is BCS is not what I would steer beginners to. If you're an experienced war gamer, I would say, yeah, but it's going to wrap your noodle because it's got these different mechanisms that you have to learn.
Yep. On the one hand, I don't think that I don't think BCS is a particularly simple game system. I don't think it is. But nor do I think it's particularly complicated. And I think you certainly could introduce somebody new to it from somebody that knew what they were doing. But I don't think that the rule book structurally is optimized for teaching somebody completely new to wargaming that game system. And furthermore, a lot of veteran gamers have been playing this stuff for a long, long time, including me. I have a lot of problems necessarily getting used to what BCS is doing. So in a way, being new might help you, but in a way, experience might hurt you when it comes to BCS. But in any case, I wouldn't recommend somebody trying to play BCS, learn BCS as a first war game out of the box. You'd really want somebody to teach you.
Yeah, I love BCS. Don't get me wrong. In fact, I've taught it at the War Game Bootcamp, and but it's something that you have to kind of realize is going to take a couple, I don't know, scenarios to really get your head wrapped around what it's trying to do.
Okay, so Stegler, I believe that what Doug is saying is that most rule books are shitty, and that's why it's not optimal. You should be able to read the rule book, but most rule books are not as well written as Doug would write them. I believe that is the intended message here.
I've been to
Green awful things from outer space.
What's the easiest North Africa game?
Africa, SCS Africa by the Gamers. Not North Africa, the one that's in print right now. SCS Africa. That's the one I would point people to.
That makes sense. I have both of those, so I would agree.
I mean, North Africa is basically the same thing, except it's on 4 maps and has 4 times as many counters or something like that.
Actually, it's vastly different.
Well, I'm being facile when I say that. It is quite different, actually.
Because you have those rolls on the ports for the reinforcements and all that. But
I mean, African Campaign is pretty easy, and it's back in print now too from Compass. That's the original Jedco classic. Africa Core from Avalon Hill's pretty easy. I think it's not a great game, but it's a classic. It doesn't. I'm not saying it's not a classic. I wouldn't really recommend Africa Core to people at these people. I'd recommend Africa Campaign first. I mean, SCS Africa being out of print for many years, by the way.
Yeah, I mean, SCS North Africa is not terrible. In fact, it's not difficult. It's just it's big.
It is big, and if you want, if somebody asked for a big game, I'll get to this in a minute. If somebody asked for a big game that was nevertheless very simple, I would probably recommend SCS North Africa because it's a lot of map, but it's not a lot of counters necessarily. I believe that game has 2 counter sheets on 4 maps, right? So those counters are pretty. I mean, as befits the campaign, those counters are fairly thinly spread. So Patrick from Patrick's Tactics and Tutorials, first of all, welcome to the show, asks, how simple is simple GBOH for the new Wargamer? I'm one of those people that prefers the regular GBOH to simple GBOH because of the extra detail that it provides. I don't think that simple GBOH is much, if at all, simpler than regular GBOH. What I will say is it, really. And Gilbert Collins agrees with me, by the way. What I will say is it plays faster to some degree. I don't think it's a huge difference, but it plays faster. I think GBOH plays relatively fast anyway, but that's more a question of how big the scenarios are than anything else. The other advantage of simple GBOH is there's a lot of little differences in the rules to different GBOH games, right? If you're playing with the full rules. The stuff from Julius Caesar works kind of differently than the stuff in Alexander, which in turn works differently from the stuff in Cataphract, which in turn works differently from the stuff in Hoplite. So you're really, they're a less tightly designed and constrained game series than maybe a lot of people think they are. Simple GBOH lets you run a lot, but not all of the GBOH content out of that one rule book without having to learn all the weird differences with the Roman command system and the Manipular Legion command system and all that other stuff. So in that sense, it is simpler in that if you just want to play like the maximum number of scenarios with the minimum possible amount of rules learning, then simple GBOH is simpler in that sense. From a game to game to game to game standpoint, I don't think it's much simpler to play the battles in Julius Caesar using simple GBOH than it is with regular GBOH. But if you want sort of a more unified experience where, hey, I want to go play Chariots of Fire now, assuming you could play those battles in simple GBOH, you could do that without having to worry too much about the much extra rules overhead. So
Angry Day asks if the North Africa was the Desert Rats versus the
yes, that's this is the current in print MMP game called North Africa.
And they do have one map scenarios, just to throw that in.
Yes, I'm sure they do. So Matt Taylor, we've already talked about Gettysburg and Waterloo, but he also mentions Trevor Bender's Kursk, which I think is a very interesting suggestion. So that's based on the Battle for Moscow system. Now, Battle for Moscow is a game designed, I think, by Frank Chadwick back in the 70s as like the free intro throwaway game that GDW was going to use to introduce to new wargamers. It's super duper easy, very easy to play, and the Trevor Bender's Kursk game that came out in C3I pretty much uses that system, except that it's about 4 times as big. It's a pretty big meaty map scenario. So if you want something that if just like the small number of pieces on the map and the size of the map, which is the size of a large postcard, for something like Battle for Moscow seems a little too small, like maybe you wouldn't get much play value out of it, then that Kursk game looks like a better option.
Trevor had an entire booth at San Diego HISCon. He's doing a new one on North Africa in the same system.
Oh, that's cool.
And they did a deluxe box version of Kursk.
Mm-hmm.
So I think he's all in on that one. And he's very excited about cranking some more out, too. So
Oh, that's great. I'd be happy to check out. I mean, who am I kidding? I buy every issue of C3I anyway.
God, I just saw your
No.
video, Artie, of Compass Games loot that you had. Bloody hell, you
Yeah.
must have got a loan.
I didn't spend as much as the house payment. Let me put it that way. So, and it was all the flea market stuff was pretty that I bought was pretty inexpensive. And don't forget, I sold some stuff too, so I wasn't coming in with zero money. And I had a budget, and I didn't blow it by too much. And everything was half off. So,
no, honey, I didn't blow the budget by a lot.
No, not by much. It's a good point too. Again, these are out of print, been out of print for a long time. Gazala, not so much, but Crusader's been out of print for a long time. These are 2 SCS games. Operation Crusader is a good, I think, noob situation to play. Certainly easier for an inexperienced wargamer than something like Market Garden. But then if you then look at, say, Brazen Chariots, it's a battalion scale Crusader game, then that's pretty big, and I wouldn't recommend that to a noob, just based on scale.
I was reading what Doug and Stilgar are talking about with.
Yeah, I'm trying, Stilgar. I'm trying to.
Sorry,
I'm trying to. I'm not as such a CDG guy. I favor traditional hex and counter stuff, but there are certainly ways to use cards even in traditional hex and counter stuff. And I certainly am not about to say that there aren't many excellent CDG, like CDGs proper. Starting with Empire of the Sun for the People, Paths of Glory, I have a very high opinion of any number of games. And I bought several based on that system at Compass Expo. So you haven't seen all the unboxings yet and probably won't for months. I was thinking this exact same thing. We're going to call him Stilgar from now on.
Yes. Sorry.
So
I was
Carl has ruined this forever.
Well, started with hookers and blow. Now we're to Fremen.
So
it's always you, Carl.
Well, dyslexia abounds.
So this is another one of those things. I may have talked about this on the show, or I may have talked about this in some mental dialogue that I had with my imaginary self. I'm not sure. Where there's not a lot of imitators of Empire of the Sun, right? We've seen a lot of people adapt the For the People mechanics into their own card-driven games. We've seen a lot of people adapt the Paths of Glory card-driven mechanics, which are similar anyway, but they're not. There's kind of a method to one that's not quite the same as the other. We've seen a lot of people adapt that mechanism into a lot of other games, including things like Triumph of Chaos and 1866 and a bunch of other stuff. What we haven't really seen is somebody try to adapt the mechanisms from Empire of the Sun and elsewhere. Mark's been talking about a Mediterranean version of Empire with that system, which, shut up and take my money, Mark. But, that could be challenging too. I mean, it's a very specialized, it's a very sort of purpose-driven game design, right? I think it's, going to be tough to adapt that system to another situation.
How complex is Empire of the Sun, man?
On GMTs, I actually like for numerical reasons. I actually like GMT's 1 through 9 ranking system because there's 3 tiers: 1 to 3, 4 to 6, 7 to 10, 7 to 9, and then you have like a high, medium, and a low in each of those tiers. So you could think of a 5 as a medium weight game, right? Where you could think of 7 as a low, high complexity game. So I kind of like it. I think it ties easily to descriptive terminology. I don't know what, and it's not in here, so I can't grab it off the shelf. I don't know what it's ranked at from GMT. I'd call it on that scale about a 7. That's where I would put Empire of the Sun. I think it's a fairly demanding game, but it's not necessarily demanding because it's complicated. It's demanding because there's a lot of rules that work together to make the whole thing work. And if you kind of miss one piece, the whole thing comes apart. And then you have to in addition to learning that, you have to then master how to make that game work to your advantage to actually get good at it, right? So I think Empire of the Sun, strictly on a rules volume standpoint, is probably about a 5. But I think in aggregate, I think it comes in at about a 7 for the reasons I just mentioned.
I think that's true of a lot of Mark Herman designs. Is the rules are not complex in themselves, but trying to learn
Except
how to
Pacific War, that's pretty complicated.
Okay, yeah, you got me on that one. But I don't think they're overly complicated. I think it's complicated to learn how to play correctly.
Yeah, let alone how to play well. And because there's so much dependency of mechanics, what you can get is a situation, both Empire of the Sun and Pacific War, where a rule just seems to be completely broken because you're getting something wrong. But what you're getting wrong is not part of that rule that seems to be broken. It's a part of another rule that's impacted by the rule that you're interpreting correctly, but that now seems broken. We found this to be the case while we were busily fucking up the submarine rules in Pacific War. We eventually figured it out, but yeah, in the meantime, the entire U.S. Pacific Fleet was at the bottom of the Coral Sea. So, troop transports and all.
Carl, how many times are you going to get Pacific War on the table before you start learning to master the game?
Don't know. I haven't gotten it to the table yet. That's an Artie question.
Artie.
I have. I'll answer that, and then I'll get to Doug's point here, which I do kind of agree with Doug on this. I think that, I feel like Mark, based on what he's said publicly about Pacific War, would probably agree with this statement. Unless you are very serious about it, I do not recommend Pacific War. Okay, because it is going to be very demanding. It is going to require a lot of mental bandwidth to learn and to get good at. And while the game has a lot of tools to learn it, getting good at it is a bit of a different question. So we probably put 50 or 60 hours into it. Let me put it that way. And I feel like we were about 85% of the way toward playing it both correctly and well. And after 50 or 60 hours, that's a lot of learning curve, right?
I saw Mark Herman teach that at San Diego HISCON to a group of people.
Yeah,
and
I mean, that'd be awesome.
Repeated and repeated and repeated the same things over, and it took these guys a while.
Mark's sitting there like these bunch of dullards. It's in the book, and when Mark says that, he's always right. It's in the book.
Yeah. Oh, it's there.
So I agree with Doug here. I think that there is a kind of axis among people who kind of want the chaos versus kind of people who want the control, but nobody's really fully on one side or the other. And where a specific game falls on that spectrum may influence its appeal to you in that way. I feel I've had this complaint about Combat Commander, for example, which I feel deprotagonizes the players to too great an extent. It's not only that you don't have control, that isn't as such a problem. You lose control of your troops all the time in ASL. It's that you don't have anything to do, and I don't like.
I love the game, but I can see that
a lot of people do. I am in a minority on that. I don't think Pacific War is Mark listed it at a 9. I don't think it's a 9. I think it's an 8.
Yeah,
but
if you got Mark's brain.
Well, I mean that's true too, but it's not a straightforward game to learn. There's a lot of concepts in it that aren't common concepts, even though the game's 40, whatever it is, years old. So you're going to have to do a lot of mental gymnastics to learn that game over and above, again, volume of rules, which is related to, but not equal to, overall complexity.
You know, I have a question here, and it's directed to Mark Herman, but maybe one of you guys can answer it. Why make a game so goddamn complex? Like, why? Because I know Mark Herman doesn't like the Western theater war. Okay, he's more in the Pacific stuff. Why make it so grandiose. I mean, is that his what do you call it? The pièce de résistance?
I would say immersion.
Yeah.
I would say that there are people, and I include myself, that the more complex the game, the more immersed I am in the game, because I'm having to concentrate so much on what I'm doing.
So yeah, I agree with that. So if Stigler mentioned up thread that he thinks complexity in and of itself, or Chrome in and of it by itself, is pointless, and I actually agree with that. I think a designer ought to be simplifying wherever possible and trying to get the most effect out of the least rules volume. I think that's just a good design principle. Some designers are better at it than others. Richard Berg, not that good at it, for example. But I don't think that I mean, as somebody that plays a lot of complicated games and who's about to dive into La Bataille, for God's sake, which is kind of a, it depends on which rules version you're talking about, but in some senses it is the epitome, the ultimate masterpiece of Chrome, right? After playing it, I'll have a better idea of whether that Chrome is worth it or not. Certainly, there's a lot of things about tactical Napoleonics that other game systems at higher levels, higher scales do not give you because of that scale choice by the designer, for example. We'll see. We'll see what I end up feeling about it. And of course, West Coast Games, I almost said West End Games, mentions France 1944, which came back from Compass, and I'm pretty sure it's not in print anymore, but I could be wrong. Developed by Judd Vance, actually, the ultimate Mark Herman fanboy. And who Mark just said, I like to get him out of his hair, said, "Hey, Judd, why don't you develop this game for me?" And Judd did like a lot of physical systems design stuff for that game to make it easier to play. I was pretty impressed with that. Oh,
it's a great game. I need to get that one back to the table, as a matter of fact.
So, I mean, I think to some extent this is kind of what I was trying to say. I mean, whether you call it Chrome or not, or detail or whatever you want, Napoleonics at a tactical level should be complex and fiddly. I agree with that statement. Frankly, I think World War II stuff on a tactical level should be complex and fiddly too. David Thompson disagrees, and he's making many more dollars than I am on it. So I will assume that he is correct and that I am wrong. I have not watched that yet. I want to watch that. So. Oh, West Coast Games is Trevor Just. There we go. So everybody go follow Trevor's channel if you are not already. All right, folks, we are over time. Hopefully, folks have found this. I thought we were going to meander off this topic in like 120 seconds or less, and we didn't. I'm a little surprised. I mean, we did have a little bit of drift, but we pretty much stayed on topic of what was an easy game and what makes it an easy game and what's a complicated game and what makes it a complicated game. So, Dale Brady, yes, that is the France 1944 we're talking about. There you go. Trevor just made a channel just so he could get on your show, Dan. So, Dan should be doing a show every day. I'm just saying. All right, folks. So thanks for watching. Thanks for Carl for coming by tonight. Hopefully everybody had a great time, and we will all see you again next week at my channel.
I don't know what. Big move. Big win. The moose is loose. Big moose. Big win. The moose is loose. Big moose. Big win. The moose is loose. Big.